Okay, listen, I've been cooking this theory for a couple of months now, but I've been a little busy with the whole graduating thing and the 4-week modded Minecraft server phase. And I've procrastinated in writing the script all the way to Chapter 5's announcement and subsequent release in 2 weeks? At least at the time of writing this. But instead of standing idly by and waiting for Chapter 5 to drop to invalidate my theory, I'm instead stupidly going to plant my flag on this hill, just in time for Tricky Tony to blast me off it with a shotgun yelling, "Screw you, all of your theories are wrong!" All for the faint glimmer of glory that lies at the bottom, where I turn out to be right and can relish in my genius to an audience of rocks and roaches at the bottom of that hill. And what, pray tell, might this theory be? Well, for the 2 of you who ended up here on autoplay while you slept and didn't read the title, I believe I figured out the true meaning of pink and gold. And even further, I believe it has ties with an entity who's been creeping its way back into the public mythos. Our very own elusive Dr. Gaster, a stand-in for the mythical king. Now, I know many of you are going to immediately object with, but Gaster is green, not yellow. And to that I say, yellow still works in the color theory and under Gaster Bro, with him, Sans, and Papyrus making up the primary colors. Secondly, green could just as easily be the Eggman. Or Des. And for those who still won't think of Gaster as anything else but green, colorblind spell! There, now we're all on the same page. So let's start out simple. What on earth is the King in Yellow? Well, many of you may know it best from a Minecraft YouTube series that's recently blown up. Weefy's searching for a world that doesn't exist. The origin of the king, however, goes back much, much further. The King in Yellow, or the Yellow Mythos, is a collection of short stories written all the way back in 1895 by Robert W. Chambers. It's often considered the father of modern cosmic horror, inspiring the likes of H.P. Lovecraft and many others past him. Weefy's has only been the latest in a vast line of people using the Yellow Mythos as grounds for their own story. In fact, this very theory was gifted to me by an unknown powers beyond our realm after witnessing Weefy's original series. Or, more accurately, after witnessing how searching for a world that doesn't exist actually misunderstands the King in Yellow, in an extraordinary analysis by Frostbite Freeman on YouTube. For those curious on learning much more of the Yellow Mythos' impact in literature and delving deeper into its themes and context to Weefy's series, I highly encourage you go watch these original videos first. It's Frostbite Freeman's analysis that first got me thinking and noticing some interesting parallels between the King in Yellow and Deltarune. I won't be going over every story in the Yellow Mythos, only the ones that are important to my analysis. But if you want a more in-depth analysis of the entire anthology, I urge you to go watch his videos first. And for those of you who just came back from watching those videos, hey, thanks for supporting a fellow creator. But secondly, I've got a suspicion that a few points made in that analysis are triggering some of the Deltarune rotted brain cells in your brain. Just like mine. The Yellow Mythos, as the name suggests, features tons of symbolism surrounding the color. Symbolism that oddly mirrors a certain other cosmic entity in Deltarune. But even more jarring, and the point Frostbite Freeman spends a considerable portion of his video on, is the permeating presence of pink as a symbolic color within the latter half of these short stories. Pink and gold, well, let's not get hasty, after all those two are very common colors. Let's see if the way the Yellow Mythos presents these two symbolic colors really warrants considering Deltarune in the equation at all. The original King in Yellow, as mentioned before, is actually a collection of interconnected short stories, 10 of them in fact. The name of the book in reference to a character of the same name, the Yellow King, an entity beyond our realm, said to induce madness in anyone who comes into close contact with him or his writing. The King in Yellow is also an in-universe play, the very one that is set to drive those who read it mad. Now, it would be reasonable to assume that all of these stories deal with the king in some way. And, well, you'd be half right. But the reality of it is much more complex. Only the first 4 of the 10 stories actually mention or deal with the king, at least directly. The other 6, well, let's get to those when they become relevant. First, let's look into the first 3 stories of the Yellow Mythos. Once again, many of the conclusions I come to in this analysis are very much inspired by Frostbite Freeman's interpretation of the stories, and he goes much more in depth than I will here. So I urge you to go watch his videos first, or even read the original short stories for yourself. But the king is growing impatient. So here, let us begin the Yellow Mythos. Taking place in a 1920s New York, Though, to note, this was actually a future New York from the book's original 1895 publishing. This story follows our protagonist, Hildred Castaigne, after suffering a head injury after falling from his horse, and being omitted and soon released from a psych ward. This immediately puts into question our protagonist's narration, even before the Cursed King makes its appearance. He spends much of his time after leaving the asylum reading, and one day comes across the play The King in Yellow. Becoming absorbed by its words and captivated by its story, he obsesses over the play. Hildred tries to rid himself of it before it's too late, having only read Act 1, but the king has already grasped his psyche. Attempting to burn the book, Hildred catches a glimpse of the pages of Act 2. He rushes into the flame, grabs the faded play, and begins to read onwards, within its pages finding visions and delusions of his own grandeur, seeing himself to become a king of his own. But one person stands in his way: the line of succession, preceded by his cousin, Louis. During his time as a recluse, he meets an eccentric, if not disturbed man by the name of Wilde, a man who claims to be in the profession of repairing reputations, having amassed a large clientele of the rich and powerful, all hoping to hide from their mistakes. Wilde sees Hildred's vision of power and encourages him to take the steps proper to claim the crown, to remove his cousin from the succession. All the while, Hildred begins to fall for the daughter of the armorer's shop right below Wilde's, a young woman named Constance. A young woman who just so happens to become the fiancée of Louis. Now, after crafting a plan to remove Louis from his way towards the crown, he begins to seek out Louis, finding the right time to strike. Becoming more reclusive, he fashions himself a crown of solid gold and jewelry and hides his wares in a secure, timed safe in his house. His cousin Louis notices Hildred's concerning behaviors, being confused why he fashioned a crown of cheap brass or has been hiding his books within a biscuit box. But, what does he know? He plays along with Hildred's presumed arrangement, for a while anyways. That is until he breaks the news of him and Constance's wedding, one that has been pushed up to the very next day. Hildred takes that as a sign to remove his cousin from his way, because if he marries Constance, both his cousin and love would stand in his way to the throne. He tells Louis to meet him at midnight in the park. He then goes to Mr. Wilde and uses a man named Vance, a patron of Wilde who had his reputation repaired, to assassinate Constance. That night, when him and Louis meet, Hildred lashes out. He forces Louis to relinquish the crown, to give up the throne, and to exile himself, never to marry. He insinuates that Constance is already dead, and Louis plays along out of fear. He steps down, allowing Hildred to become the ruler, and take his place on the throne. With his plan finished, Hildred rushes back to Wilde, only to find him dead. With the very person who made his plan possible now gone, he anguishes his failure to grab the throne. He's pulled away from the room by the police, being dragged through the halls and past both Louis and Constance, both of whom shocked and terrified of what became of Hildred. He's then put back into the mental asylum for insanity, and shortly after passes away.
It's party time! P-A-R-T. Why? Because I gotta!
Honestly, this one could have just been avoided if they knew about polycules. Our story begins with a sculptor in France, Boris. Famous for his craft, he's discovered a new mystical way to create his sculptures. He found a means, through dunking things in a mysterious water, to turn them into marble. His most famous work with this at the time was a sculpture of the Fates, the very same we see Hildred interact with in The Repairer of Reputations. He often hangs out with his lover, Genevieve, our protagonist, Alec, and a mutual friend of theirs named Jack. In the past, there's a sort of love triangle between Alec, Boris, and Genevieve, one that Boris would end up winning. One day, Alec awakes to Genevieve playing the spinet, a harpsichord-like instrument, in the middle of the night. The following morning, she would fall incredibly ill, with Alec following soon after. While feverish, Alec suffers states of delirium, with Genevieve not faring much better. Under the influence of the drugs used to medicate her, she would throw herself into the lake, the very one that Boris had learned turns anything submerged into marble. Boris is distraught over the loss of his love, and his own discovery no less, and chooses to meet with Genevieve in death by taking his own life. All the while, Alec in his delirium is visited by visions of specters of his friends, only learning of their tragic fate after awakening from their friend Jack. We hear that Boris, before passing, had left all of his statues willed to Alec, even that of Genevieve. For a long while, Alec lived trying to come to grips with what had happened, not daring to move the statue of Genevieve, whom he still loved dearly. However, just as he begins working up the courage to move on, a miracle happens. Where once was a marbled fish statue in the pool, now flopped a living one. The marble's effect seemed only temporary, and we end our story with Genevieve following shortly after. We never get to know what became of Alec and Genevieve, as our story ends shortly after, leaving that up to the reader. The Yellow King, the one who shall not be named. Hastur. While actually not very referenced in the original short stories, at least not in the context he is nowadays, Hastur is still the one that's commonly given the name to the Yellow King. Although a lot of that actually came from Lovecraft, who loved Chambers' original writing so much that he made a fanfic OC of it. And Lovecraft is kind of weird and not important to this right now, so we're just gonna ignore him. But within Chambers' short stories, Hastur is actually much more of an enigmatic name. The name is used to reference a couple of different things. In The Repair of Reputations, Hastur is a place, a vast city. The yellow sign drops Hastur with seemingly no context. Only in the Demoiselle d'Ice is Hastur used to reference a supernatural entity, and even then only maybe. But across each version of Hastur lies a common thread. Whatever it is doesn't exist, at least not on the same plane as the characters of the stories. It's something that exists outside of the time and space of these individual stories, encompassing all of the Yellow mythos in varying ways. The man who speaks in hands, the one who shall not be named. Gaster. While not actually very referenced in the original game of Undertale, at least not in the context he is nowadays, Gaster is still the one that nowadays is commonly— Wait, didn't we just do this? If it wasn't obvious, I find some really odd similarity between Gaster and Hastur. Although, just for the simplicity of the video, let's assume when I say Hastur, I'm referring to the Yellow King himself, not the enigmatic name used in the original short stories. Both are entities that live beyond the worlds of fiction they are present in, existing in a layer of reality above their own respective stories, yet still in a layer underneath our own. A little reality sandwich. Their residences are even somewhat similar. Carcosa, the city and residence of the Yellow King, is said to have black stars dotting the sky above, a harsh wind blowing from Lake Hali. If you ignore the two twin sons of Carcosa, it sounds awfully like a place of darker yet darker. Even the Lake Hali, a potential parallel to the lakes of Hometown, a place that's seemingly gaining connections with the depths and darkness. Even stranger, neither of them ever communicate directly with either the characters in the games or stories, or us as the audience. They only speak through surrogates, through text written by them, or through machines meant to access our world, or through vessels who have witnessed them. As a scientist, Gaster uses his machines. Whether it's the core, the survey program he uses to connect the player to the world of Deltarune, or Twitter.com. But in each of these instances, we never speak face to face. We don't even know if this is what he actually looks like. Because this isn't Gaster, it's just a Yumeniki reference, I will be dying on this hill. Gaster only ever speaks to us through the barrier of a machine. Hastur, on the other hand, is a bit more enigmatic. However, we do know that he can communicate through writing, both in the Yellow King play and the Repair of Reputations and the Mask, or metatextually through the Yellow King's poems that we read. Reading the works of Hastur is often what's considered to drive one mad. But what exactly about witnessing him does this? Well, in much of the Yellow mythos, we can examine a strange warping of time. Characters such as Hildred or Alec becoming aware of their own roles in the story. What purpose they serve, what their future selves will do. Those who don't succumb to the madness and instead become vessels of Hastur choose to accept that fate. Oh wait, I should probably mention in the Yellow mythos, the vessel of the king is actually a bit ambiguous, both as to who actually is a vessel and what their role is. It can be argued that Wild and Hildred are both vessels, and many other of the symbolic items scattered in the anthology. But in Undertale/Deltarune, the vessels of Gaster are much more apparent. First and foremost, obviously, the Goners and Gaster followers, those touched with the knowledge of existence outside their place. All of them seem to derive themselves from Gaster's existence, almost as if they've accepted their part to play in a grander narrative. They know what they are, characters in a game, and accept that Gaster is now in a realm greater than theirs. Gaster follower number 3, in the midst of gossiping about his fate, says that Gaster is listening to them. After all, it's rude to gossip about someone who's listening. Gaster follower number 2 claims to hold a piece of him, despite supposedly being shattered across time and space. And Clam Girl? Oh, Clam Girl. Sure, she could have just mentioned Susie as a bit of a Deltarune tease, but like, we can all agree that she's just as canon as the other Goners, right? She has knowledge of a time and reality she's not even a part of, but one that Gaster certainly does. The Yellow King, by proxy, is a bit more vague in his vessels. It's no secret that the Yellow King drives people mad, that's like his whole thing that people remember him doing, but it's not entirely accurate. Hastur exists above the world of the characters. He has knowledge of what they are, what they will do, and most importantly, their importance in the narrative. Those who glimpse the Yellow King, whether by his play of the same name, or those acting as vessels of the king, are cursed to go insane. They become aware of their existence in a story, but even with this knowledge, they can't deviate from their paths. After all, they have roles to play, and their knowledge of them or not won't stop that from happening. It's very much hinted that while in the repairer of reputations as a vessel of Hastur, the Pale Mask also might be, and of course the play itself. But moreover, the king when interacting with others gives them knowledge of their own place in their story. While many may not become devout followers of the king, at least in the original stories, like with Gaster, the mechanism of showing a character their place inside their respective stories is still the same. Both are hinted to even exist partially in Our World 2. Gaster, to a lesser extent, has canonically interacted with the fanbase on places like Twitter.com or the code of the game. With Hastur, the original short stories draw into question for the reader that if the play that drives characters mad in the stories is the very same one that you are reading. Though Gaster does seem to share that exact same madness trait as Hastur, just not in Undertale. A certain jester and puppet, driven to madness by some sort of encounter with an entity beyond their world, one who shows them knowledge of their existence, and both driven to madness because of it. Jevil is perhaps one of the most obvious examples of this. After all, chaos and madness may as well be his catchphrase. Buried underneath all the chaos and crazed speech, though, is an odd little line. All the way back in Chapter 1, Jevil somehow knew of Queen. He knew where the next Dark World would be and who its ruler was. Now, some people have explained this as Jevil somehow knowing this information from the night, or knowing the Queen from a Dark World previously. Some people even say that it's just a tease for the next chapter and not to take it too seriously, but I don't think it's that simple. Jevil is the one to introduce the freedom motif, not just in his music, banger by the way, but the theme of freedom within Deltarune itself. Locked up in a cage, he sees the world behind bars, and himself the only one free. Now, if it's true that the secret bosses have had some sort of encounter with Gaster, or a force outside of their world, then it makes sense to assume that whatever knowledge he gained is what turned him mad, to see only himself as free. Learning his part to play as a character in a game's story, and the path of fate that his world is set on, it would be reasonable to assume that he truly did know of Queen, of the future Dark World. Just as in Chamber's stories, characters catching a glimpse of their own future actions no longer exist purely in the linear narrative their story plays out in. Jevil too can see the grander narrative of Deltarune through his encounters with those who lay outside of his reality. It's a freeing thing to know the truth. A freeing thing to recognize the strings that pull everyone and everything along. But knowing about your strings isn't the same as being free of them. In fact, in his freedom, Jevil remains just as trapped by the strings guiding his actions before. A fact that our next secret boss comes to realize and hate. Spamton G. Spamton, the lovable glooby thing, is our next recipient of that oh so alluring Gaster phone call. Like Jevil, he's someone who seeks freedom, stardom, to be a big shot. We all know his story by now, he yearns for his freedom back. He knows that there's more out there, not just in the darker light world, but also in worlds beyond those. Unlike Jevil though, who seems to gain knowledge of the place above Deltarune, learning of his grander purpose as a narrative, Spamton's knowledge instead digs down, deep into the inner workings of his world. He learns of the depths, or the code. We can see clearly in his shop dialogue that he has some sort of connection and knowledge to the depths, as we can hear what is assumedly Dessa's voice, or whoever's in the code, through him. Even the place he turns to after losing it all, the basement, we see as what becomes of corrupted, forgotten, and abandoned data in the cyberworld. Hence why Mettaton's body is there, an abandoned, unrealized dream of a Lightner. But even attaining all the power that Jevil had, Spamton noticed something he didn't. His strings were still attached. Despite all of the scheming, knowledge of how his world works, or connections to things outside of the cyberworld, he was still bound. His strings attached to the track of the words that carry the story along, guiding his actions to serve a greater purpose, and he can't take it. He always has eyes for more power, more freedom. He seeks the use of your soul. Something, well, we'll get to that later. So, we cut his strings. Spamton falls, now free from the fate that Deltarune dictated for him. His part now played, he's discarded. Even some other Darkners seem to have some grander knowledge of their purpose than the narrative. Ralsei believing his role to be only of fulfilling the prophecy, Sham, who really feels like the most knowledgeable character we have, and the closest thing to one of the original Gaster followers, or even Chris. Chris even having some knowledge of beings that supersede Gaster or the Code, us as the player. Some characters themselves existing inside different planes, such as Eram / the Shadow Mantle, and oh my god, you! I actually really like this transition and title card, but I really should talk about the third King in Yellow story first. The third book of the Yellow Mythos, and one I didn't actually mention earlier. Despite the short story being likely the most cosmic horror of the bunch, it actually doesn't get nearly as much attention as the first two, or perhaps even as the Yellow Sign. And for poor reason, I actually really like this one. I think it's the most fascinating of the Yellow Mythos for its versatility and its metaphor. A versatility I will absolutely be abusing over the next couple of minutes. Our protagonist, who never gives his name, attends a Sunday morning church service. A weekly tradition, resting in the house of God, and hearing the gorgeous bellows of the church organ during worship. But today, something was different. Today, he was on edge, as he had just read The King in Yellow. The tradition of service and bellowing organ played on as usual, but the organist this Sunday was different. The organ, typically ethereal and resonant, today was harsh, almost sinister, although none of the other churchgoers seemed to care, or perhaps even notice. Soon, the speech of the pastor silences the haunting organ, and the organist leaves along the gallery. As the speech continues, our protagonist turns towards the gallery to see the organist leaving, again seemingly from the exact same place he left just moments ago. But when our protagonist meets his gaze, the organist shoots a glare of pure hatred towards him. The service ends, and our main character leaves shaken, excusing the odd interaction with simply his mind playing tricks. Yet, right outside the doors, stood the organist, with the same look of hatred. Running across town, the organist appears again and again and again across every single corner, yet no one else notices or minds, driving our protagonist into a panic. He flees throughout the city, the organist somehow never further away than when he had just left the church. Thinking to call a cab, he makes his way home, but the organist, somehow moving beyond normal space, corners him there. The sermon then ends with a screech of chairs, jolting our protagonist awake. He had fallen asleep, or at least that's the most logical explanation. But the organist, again, walks out of the church, the exact way he had before. Our protagonist follows, exiting the church, only to hear a discordant blare of the organ. The light overhead begins to dim, and above him appear the black stars of Carcosa, the winds of Lake Holly blowing across the air. Our story ends with an overwhelming voice, appearingly that of the king himself. It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living god. So why bring this up? Well, the organist has a pattern I want to look over. Our protagonist in the story feels like he should be punished, that he's being hunted by whatever he's done. While textually this act was the mere reading of The King in Yellow, subtextually it could be read as the protagonist having done something regretful in his past. Something he's desperate to atone for, yet feels like is hunting him to distribute punishment. And now that I've gone over the textual analysis, I can get back to... Alright, I'm just gonna come out and say it, I don't think Friend is a character. At least not an active player within the story. Friend has only ever been seen in the shadows, hiding just out of sight, yet always seemingly nearby. His name being simply just Friend to me seems that he's more of an avatar than a full-on character. A representation, just as many other Gaster-related things are. And we know Friend is related to Gaster due to his file name, image_friend, which is how anything Gaster-related in Deltarune is named. This means that Friend also likely exists outside of Deltarune. Unless there are more entities un-Gaster-related out there, I think it would be safe to assume that Friend's plan is whatever Gaster's is. No, rather I think Friend and the Organist are one and the same. A being seemingly otherworldly to the characters in the story, one that doesn't follow the rules of time they do. Whether it be from Carcosa or the depths of Deltarune's code, both of these entities endlessly chase their respective victims. Victims who both see themselves as deserving of punishment for a past deed. While they try and run from that mistake, deep down they feel that their fate has already been decided, and that they will see their retribution. I believe Friend to be the embodiment of Chris's trauma, for their assumed part to play in the disappearance of Des. It's clear throughout the game, and especially Chapter 4, that Chris despises their past. They hate to think of themselves as the same person as they were when Des disappeared, but at the same time they feel like that mistake has earned them divine punishment. Just as the organist shows terrible visions of Carcosa, I believe Friend will do the same to the depths. The entity that pulls Chris and perhaps the others into the darkness, where they have no choice but to make peace with their past. In the Court of the Dragons, the true fate of our protagonist is left ambiguous, only left with that final quote, "It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God." A line actually from Hebrews 10:31. In the Bible, this line refers to the fear of facing the Lord and judgment for your sins. While yes, in Christianity, because of Jesus' sacrifice on the cross, all of one's sins can be atoned for, this line refers specifically to the one who continues and intentionally committing sin. Someone who fully knows the truth and word of their actions, yet chooses to continue sin instead of repent. This is the crossroads I believe Chris is headed into. Despite the mistakes of their past and the extreme guilt they feel over Dessa's disappearance, they can still find forgiveness for it, both from themselves and others. However, once Chris fully finds out the truth of her disappearance, her potential turning into the night, and the ramifications of the prophecy, they must choose to either continue their mistakes, knowing the consequences, or to accept the past and move forward to become someone who can change for the better and allow themselves forgiveness. Also, I kind of wrote myself into a corner with the script and don't know how to transition to the next topic, so whoa, look at Friend's eyes! Ooh, I sure hope those colors don't have any symbolic importance! Yeah, it's the funny colors again. So far we've talked about the stories of the Yellow mythos, but the astute among you, or those who already know where I'm going with this, might see that I've only mentioned 3 of the stories. There are 10 in the original King in Yellow. That's because the king that made these stories so famous all but disappears after the yellow sign. At least no longer plays an obvious role. The latter half of the mythos are love stories, one where the king or his play makes seemingly no appearance. Once again, for the sake of brevity, I'll only have time to gloss over these stories, but they are also much shorter than those in the first half. More poems, I suppose. The Demoiselle d'Is. D'Ice?
Demoiselle 10.
God, I hate the French. An overconfident man who finds love whilst lost in the moorland. She would take him in for the night, and they would soon fall in love before he throws himself in front of a venomous snake to protect her. He survived the attack, but the fate of his lover remains much more mysterious. The Prophet's Paradise, a collection of short poems, each on the meaning of love and truth. The Street of the Four Winds, a lone man in Paris caring for a stray cat who wandered into his workshop, belonging to a lone mistress Sylvia near to his heart. He returns the cat, only to find its mistress deceased in the darkness of her bedroom. The Street of the First Shell, a tale of Lady Sylvia, ominously parallel to that of the Four Winds, surviving a savage siege onto Paris of the Franco-Prussian War. The Street of Our Lady of the Fields, an American art student's infatuation with a mysterious art model by the name Valentine, only for her past to shatter her muse in his mind. And finally, Rue Barrière, a love triangle between our protagonists and a mysterious woman, named only after the street they viewed her, Rue Barrière, with both failing to win her affection. The latter half of Chambers' anthology here uses a lot of imagery of pink, as well as having much stronger themes of art and love. While the first half used a lot of yellow, obviously with the king, glimmers of pink still show themselves here and there. Among many interpretations, pink and yellow represent the 2 ways that the Yellow King interacts with the world, through love and through art. Of course, viewing these 2 colors through the symbolic lens also requires us to view the king the same. The king himself represents the madness of, well, being human. Art and love encompass the human experience throughout time. Art, how we express our existence with the world, and love, how we express ourselves with each other. Both of these aspects of ourselves can often induce madness. Passion, obsession, pride, envy, they encompass the best and worst of being human. The madness the king inflicts is the madness that we are all driven to by these 2 things. And that's why the king speaks through his play, an art form that expresses raw emotion to its viewers. It's easy to fall for the maddening strength and obsession art and love cause, but Chambers writes of a way to avoid it. Simply, to just accept the madness and live within it. Life itself is maddening, love and art both what dooms and saves us. Now that's all well and good and all, but how does this relate back to my dinosaur Yuri? Well, I believe it to be well accepted that Deltarune deals with the themes of escapism, the Dark Worlds themselves being a personification of art's ability to transmit our deeper thoughts and desires. Chris is even shown to have been involved in art therapy. And, well, as for love, I don't think I need to explain that one. Undertale and likely Deltarune 2 are very much the power of friendship type games. Of course, love for one another and the hope that comes from it would be the key to saving the day. So that's kind of why I believe friends to be more of a personification, a literal representation of the madness that art and love can induce into someone. The darkness that one falls into when they refuse to confront it. But the dark as well is just as strong a force for good in people's lives. Susie learning to love and exist as just herself. Ralsei coming into his, or her, own. And Chris, well, we'll just have to wait and see. Even Gasser himself shares many parallels with the Yellow King, seemingly involved just underneath the surface of the first half of Deltarune, yet could potentially go mysteriously silent for the rest of the game. And I can already hear a bunch of you yelling at me. Yes, I can hear you. You're all saying, oh, Mr. I, why even make this video? We already knew all of this Deltarune stuff. Do you really think Toby, my personal friend Fox, actually pulled from the King in Yellow? That's absurd. And to you I say, no. But I still have a reason for wanting to bring these connections up, reasons that will have to wait until another video. Yeah, I know, but listen, I'm already hard pressed for getting this out by the time Chapter 5 releases, so I gotta save the rest for later. But don't worry, because even if Tricky Tony does meet me at the bottom of that hill and says, "You're wrong, dumbass," it doesn't actually matter for this next part. See, I don't think Toby actually uses the King in Yellow as inspiration. I'd honestly be hard pressed to say he's even read the original Chambers anthology. But these stories are foundational. In my time researching them, I found connections to so many modern works in literature. These came out even before the Cthulhu mythos, and Lovecraft used them to influence his work, which in turn influenced an entire genre of horror. The reason I can relate so much of Deltarune to these stories and themes of these stories is because I think we can find them in tons of modern media. A foundational classic like Frankenstein or Dracula, just like The King's Play infests the minds of its readers, the themes infest that of modern literature. It's been fascinating to see all of these connections and themes from shows and games I've experienced with the lessons and imagery Chambers was writing with nearly 150 years ago. Hell, I'm sure half of you watching were already thinking about how these stories sound awful like your niche hyperfixation. So that's what part 2 will be about. How we as people interpret the stories we read, how we connect stories to each other and our own lives, and how similar messages and topics can evolve throughout the ages. How do authors today handle the same issues an author centuries ago did? So do I actually think Deltarune is going to become the next Searching for a World That Doesn't Exist? No, not really, but I do enjoy comparing how the themes of art, love, grief, and trauma have evolved to the medium and author telling it. And specifically how the King in Yellow seemingly inspired so much after it, whether knowingly or not. So if you want to see that video and support me making more, seriously, had another one of these scripts like 80% written before this derailed me, you should subscribe. You know, only if you want to. I mean, it'd be pretty cool, I guess. But as a small reward, I can give you a little quick peek into what my next video is all about. A small little indie game called